Vay aşağıda cici yakışıklı, vay vay vay.
Паштони враг, нищо. Нищо паштони.
Mr. Armenian-American, Congratulations on Armenian vocals, Mr. Armenian-American on oud, and I'm Congratulations, thank you.
program very shortly. Can anyone hear? Someone wave.
Can you increase the volume a little bit?
Everyone to come to their seats. Thank you. All come to their seats, we can get the program underway. Thanks very much. I know you can hear me because the microphone is working. We've had the chance tonight to enjoy the Chukassian Folk Ensemble. And I'd like to say thank you to John and Barbara Chukassian. The ensemble, as many of you know, is very well acclaimed. They were invited by the President of Armenia to perform a month-long concert and festival tour across Armenia and Karabakh. And they are accompanied tonight by guitarist Harry Arkoyan and Mr. Ara Davanchian. Please give them a big round of applause. Thank you very much. I would like at this moment to ask His Eminence Archbishop Hognan Derderian, Primate of the Western Diocese, to come up and
Father Moses and distinguished guests. What brings us here tonight is celebration of 400 years of Armenian-American heritage, 1618-2018. 400 years of achievements, 400 years of living with resilience and vision, bringing into this blessed land our culture, our history, our language, our vision and aspirations to be part of the making of this country, the country which also has embraced our orphans and survivors of the first genocide of the 20th century. As the servant of Christ our Lord, and the servant of the Armenian Church and this community, on behalf of all of you, I also would like to extend my warmest regard and gratitude to two very special individuals, Mrs. Maggie Mangasaryan Boshen and I have to say that, dear Maggie, you have been an exceptional, visionary director of the Eskija Museum. You bring new life in the life of this community. You are a strong advocate of our heritage to make sure that every single person who enters into the museum, they feel in the depth of their hearts the spiritual transformation, the reawakening moment, and the moment to be connected to their history, because history is very important for our identity. All I can say, thank you, God bless you, and may all your dreams come true. And on behalf of all those who are present here today, we extend to you our deep, deep appreciation. And also, very special thank you and my sincere gratitude to Dr. Haik Demoyan, all the way from Armenia and Harvard today, to be here with us with this exceptional exhibition where he has also got his contribution. I have known Haik Demoyan as the director of the Genocide Museum in Yerevan. What he has done as a young leader, as young academician, is exceptional. People who visit the Genocide Museum in Yerevan, they live the place as a new person, enriched with the truth of history, the archive that you have collected. It challenges us to be always strong in our commitment to bring honor to the memory of the victims of the Armenian genocide. And today, with this celebration, 400 years of celebration, Armenian-American history, you once again inspire us, enrich us spiritually with a sense of strong commitment to continue to be contributors to those who have come to this country 400 years ago, made history, and they challenge us to continue that history with new enrichments. God bless you, Haik, and we all extend to you again on behalf of all those who are present here at every race. Make sure about you. And before I close my remarks, as I was looking at the dates, 16, 18, a few weeks ago, a few months ago, also when I was in Mexico, I was reminded that first Armenians went to Mexico 1602. It is amazing that how two Armenians, by the way, have arrived to the city of Mexico. One day you will be hearing about them. I'm not going to say what happened to them. It's rather bizarre what happened to them, but I will share it with Dr. Haik Demoyan. I think that would be interesting to share it with our people. God bless you and enjoy this weekend, a tremendous weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good evening again, everyone, and welcome to this very special evening and this very special weekend in celebration and in exploration of 400 years of Armenian-American heritage. It was a couple of years ago now, I think, that Haik Demoyan was visiting in Boston, and we were chatting about things, when he said, "Mark, do you know what the significance is of 2018? I said, "Sure, it's the centennial of the First Republic." "Yes," he said, "but what else?" And he had me there, I have to say. Then he reminded me that it was also the 400th anniversary of the first Armenian known to have set foot in North America, the oft-spoken of, not so well-known, Martin the Armenian. And I think Haik already had in mind some of the things that we have seen come to fruition since then, such as his magnificent book that we'll be hearing about tonight and this weekend conference. I'm not sure why I've been granted the privilege of being the master of ceremonies for this great event, but I would like to think that it is because the subject of Armenian-American history and culture is one that is very near and dear to me, and one that I've tried my best to promote during my 20 years at NASAR, the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research. One of the first major undertakings I was involved in was the Armenians of New England Conference in 1999, organized by NASAR along with numerous other Boston area organizations. And anytime I try to push in any way possible work that contributes to our understanding of this very neglected area of Armenian-American history, politics, culture, literature. It's really unacceptable that there is no comprehensive history of Armenian Americans the way there is of, say, Canadian Americans. And I'm thinking of Isabelle Caprielian's excellent book, Like Our Mountains. Or that the great works by Robert Myrack, Torn Between Two Lands, or Ani Bakalian's Armenian Americans from Being to Feeling Armenian, written now decades ago, should stand as the last word on their subjects to date, rather than as merely the first among many. or that Armenian-American literature be so neglected that even our most famous writer, William Saroyan, is largely unread, even by Armenian-Americans. I'm reminded of conversations I used to have with another Martin the Armenian, the late Dr. Martin Duranian from Worcester, Massachusetts, who I'm sure many of you knew. Martin would occasionally call or come by and visit, and we would talk about issues of mutual interest in Armenian-American history, in Massachusetts Armenian history, and we'd get going, and it would be time for him to leave, and he'd say, "Mark, these things are so important. We have to do these things. We have to do it. Nobody else is going to do it. We have to do these things. You know how important this is." And for 90-odd years, Martin was committed to documenting Armenian-American history and to getting the word out about the many interesting aspects of our history and culture. Well, this weekend can't correct all of that, of course, but it will focus welcome and much needed attention on a number of important aspects of Armenian-American history, culture, politics, and life. So of course, we invite you to join us tomorrow for the conference. Please be here no later than 9:30 a.m. because we have a full day of presentations by a fantastic group of scholars and researchers, many of whom are here tonight. I would like to ask you to join me in acknowledging with gratitude the sponsoring organizations involved in this event. The Arat Eskejian Museum, the Armenian Studies Program at California State University, Northridge, the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute in Yerevan, Project Save Armenian Photograph Archives, and the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research. Please. A group of people from these organizations worked hard to make this event possible. But as Surpazan said, no one worked harder, no one ever works harder than Maggie Mangasarian Goshen. So by all means, you can't applaud enough for Maggie. She is this museum's irreplaceable director and someone I've had the pleasure to work closely with for 10 years now or more. Another person, of course, who deserves special recognition is Dr. Haik Demoyan, who has from day one, if not before day one, been a driving force behind this occasion, with his enthusiasm for and deep knowledge of Armenian-American history. Thanks, Haik. We also owe special thanks to Mr. Luther Eskejian and the Ararat Home Board of Trustees, to Derek Lukasian and staff, to Ani Dikranyan and Bardi Kuyunjan, Arthur Hovsepian, Nora Nalbandian, Greg and Nora Mazmanyan, and Tamar Krikorian, to Professor Varam Shamasian of CSU Northridge, to Nasser's West Coast team, Rupen Berberian, Dr. Greg Katabjian, Jesse and Sylvia Matosian, and Bruce Rowe. All these folks deserve our gratitude for their hard work, as well as, of course, the performers and speakers we have heard from and will hear from later tonight and tomorrow. They've all gone above and beyond the call of duty to be here and to put together performances and presentations for the occasion, and they all deserve our thanks. So now, as the first order of business, I would like to welcome Mr. William Joseph Ryland, who will present Old Glory Speaks, followed by Mr. Haik Davidian performing on the duduk. Oh.
Yeah, we need the microphone.
Very well, yeah. I tell you what I'll do, I'll put my stick over here. Let's see, I'm going to go back this way, so I'll just put it right here. No, I'm not. wonderful. Am I coming through? Yeah, ma'am. National Sojourners is an organization, in fact we're 200 years old this year, of Masons who are veterans. I was in the Army for 28 years, and I liked the Army. It was a good life. And I would have stayed on longer, I guess, because I had nothing else to do, but I got a letter from the Department of the Army. And they said, boy, it's time for you to retire. You got to get out. So you don't have any say-so when that happens. Anyway, one of the major things that the National Sojourners do is encourage patriotism and Americanism throughout the country. And there's nothing more honorable than the flag of our country. This flag represents our nation. It is known by many as Old Glory. Listen to the message that it brings us. Listen while Old Glory speaks. I am the flag of the United States of America. I was conceived in the dreams of liberty and in the hopes of freedom. I was designed and stitched by the hands of Betsy Ross. Though I was never an orphan, I was adopted by the Continental Congress in 1777 and proclaimed the national emblem of a nation newly born on this continent, fighting valiantly for survival and destined to bring to all mankind a new concept of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I've been many places and have witnessed many events in our American history. I was there when they fired the shot heard round the world. I felt the biting cold in Valley Forge and gave warmth and comfort to George Washington and his tired and hungry Continental Army. I saw Molly Pitcher take the cannon swab from the hands of her dead husband and continue the fight for our liberty. I rode with Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys. I saw the signal that started the midnight ride of Paul Revere. I was there in the late twilight in Fort McHenry and inspired Francis Scott Key to write the immortal Star-Spangled Banner. I was flown above the decks of old Ironsides and from the masts of the Yankee and China clippers. I blazed the trail with Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett and stood beside them at the Alamo until the end. The southern wind of the Stars and Bars blew hard on me. But one nation under God prevailed, and I still fly high and proud for all. I was carried through the halls of Montezuma and to the shores of Tripoli. I fell to the ground in Custer's last stand, and there were no friendly hands to pick me up. I galloped up the slopes of San Juan Hill with Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders. Now, in Europe, the first time, I stayed with the boys over there until it was over there. I saw many of the youths and manhood fall and lie still in death. They had given their last full measure of devotion to what I stand for. The war was over for them forever. But I have kept my lonely vigil over their graves and have stayed there to watch the poppies grow amid the crosses, row on row in Flanders fields. I was raised by 6 brave men during the hell of Iwo Jima. I was on the beaches of Normandy, and I was with General MacAuliffe when he answered nuts at the Battle of the Bulge. I proudly waved over our troops fighting to keep the peace in Korea, and the jungles of Vietnam, and the deserts of Afghanistan and Iraq. Americans have carried me to the South Pole, the North Pole, and to the moon. Now, all these events that we've talked about have not come without cost. Throughout our brief history as a nation, when danger had threatened, millions of men and women have left their homes and families to defend me and the nation for which I stand. Some never to return. Yet, they are embraced forever within my folds, for their blood has given me stripes of red. Their purity is remembered in my stripes of white. Their souls are cradled in my stars, and their courage is embedded in my blue. I have been trampled, burned, and spit upon by those who are jealous of what the citizens of our nation have accomplished. But make no mistake about it, I will always be here because I am an inseparable link in the chain that binds men to God and country. I am a symbol of the greatest country on earth, for I am the stars and stripes forever. I am Old Glory.
To perform on the duduk. fortunate tonight to have an outstanding keynote speaker and friend to many people here, Dr. Mary Papazian. You can read Dr. Papazian's bio at length in your program, but in brief, and it's hard to be brief about her many accomplishments. Dr. Papazian has since 2016 served as president of San Jose State University, and she has over 25 years of teaching and administrative experience, including 10 years as president of Southern Connecticut State University in New Haven, provost and senior vice president for academic affairs at Lehman College of the City University of New York, dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Montclair State University in New Jersey, and associate dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Oakland University in Michigan. Dr. Papazian began her career at Oakland University. She's a native of Southern California, and both she and her husband, Dr. Dennis Papazian, have long been active members of the Armenian-American community, and actually I think that's a substantial understatement. Please welcome Dr. Mary Papazian.
Thank you, Mark, and it's great to see so many old friends here tonight. It's really a delight for me to be here as we come together to celebrate 400 years of Armenian presence in America. Starting with Martin the Armenian, who came to Virginia in 1618, just 10 years after the founding of the Virginia colony in Jamestown. The Armenians initially came to America in a trickle that slowly gained steam by the mid to late 19th century, becoming a flood as the 20th century unfolded. And now, in the early years of the 21st century, the Armenian community in the United States, perhaps the most important of the Armenian diasporas around the world. The Armenian-American story is an important story of a layered community initially straying from the homeland to find adventure, opportunity, and education, but in the last 100 years, coming to escape tragedy, war, and turmoil. As some of you may know, my mother's family was one of the earliest to arrive on these shores, although not nearly as long ago as Martin the Armenian. You can laugh. It's okay. I was just wondering if they should. It's so serious, right? It was my mother's great uncle, Krikor Khazarian, my great-grandmother's brother, who first made the voyage across the ocean to come to the New World, already a land of opportunity. Arriving from Marzavan in 1879, nearly 140 years ago, Krikor came to New York, where a representative from the Brotherhood Winery in Poughkeepsie, New York, came to meet the boat to seek employees for his winery. My great-great-uncle Krikor was delighted to find a job so quickly, saved all his money, and 5 years later went back to Marzavan to bring his father, Lazarus Khazarian, to America, where he joined Krikor at the winery. Krikor and his father worked for another 5 years, and then went back to Marzavan to bring the rest of their family. What prompted them to leave Marzavan is not clear, but they must have had intimations of the mistreatment of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire that would become bloody just a few years later. Krikor brought to America, among other family members, my great-grandmother Elizabeth, her husband Krikor Altunian, their baby son John, my great-uncle John, and my great-grandmother's sister, Pilatsu. Some of the family went to Denver, and we lost track of them. But my grandfather's family, he wasn't yet born, made their way from New York to California, following one of the brothers who had traveled west earlier. The relatives who had come to California prompted them to come here because they said the landscape was just like it was back home, and it would be familiar. And for those of you who, like my family and I, have traveled the length of historic Armenia, you know they were right. And so my great-grandparents settled in Fresno, where my grandfather was born. Now apparently my great-grandfather wasn't much of a farmer, which is what you did in Fresno. And so he brought his young family, including my 2-year-old grandfather, to Los Angeles in 1905, where they settled and lived out their lives. And as I understand it, they were one of the first 10 Armenian families in Los Angeles. The thread from Martin to my great-great-uncle Krikor is unbroken, although just a trickle. But by the turn of the 20th century, the character of immigration had changed, and the Armenian-American diaspora, as we know it now, began to take shape. I want to commend the organizers for initiating this interesting and timely discussion on Armenians in America, as it is not often that this story is told in its fullest. Usually we focus on the last 100 years and forget the 300 that preceded it. The American diaspora of the Armenian people is arguably at present the most important in the world, although perhaps not the most numerous. Others grew more rapidly before and after the genocide, because of many factors that I need not get into tonight, but chiefly because of proximity, the ease of transportation, security, and the availability of ways to make a living. While I don't know the exact numbers, I understand that the Armenian diaspora in Russia is larger than that in America, because so many Armenians, particularly the young men, have gone to Russia in recent years seeking jobs and economic opportunity. The two diasporas are distinctly different in language and culture. The Russian diaspora, tinctured by 70 years of communism and 30 years of semi-autocratic and oligarchic rule in both Armenia and Russia, and the Armenian-American diaspora, in a more complex pattern, is tinctured by the various strands of the American Protestant and democratic traditions. Both the Russian and American diasporas are now the most important, in different ways, for the very survival of the Armenian state and nation. The American diaspora, because it resides in the most powerful country in the world, and the Russian diaspora, because of Russia's direct interest in the South Caucasus and its traditional predominance in the area, particularly since the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the weakening of Iran after the fall of the Shah and its loss of American support. The roots planted by Martin the Armenian 400 years ago and strengthened by enterprising immigrants like my great-great-uncle Krikor and the many waves of immigration that followed have created a strong and thriving Armenian-American community. If we look back a mere 50 or 60 years ago, however, there were important diasporas in Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon. The slow demise of these diasporas, with their strong Armenian-speaking communities, fed the Armenian community in America with a rich revitalization of culture, which was not always appreciated. Finally, we see the Armenian diaspora in America fed by people fleeing Armenia. Their social mores differed substantially from those Armenians who were brought up in the West. And it is not yet clear what effect this new influx of Eastern Armenians will have on the Armenian diaspora in America. And so, we have a rich field of study in front of us. But right now, I'd like to concentrate on our present topic, Armenians in America. Now, it may seem naive to pose this simple question. What is an Armenian? Or who is an Armenian? Now, this is an important question in general, and is especially relevant when we speak of diasporas, as Ani Bakalyan made clear in her book a number of years ago, Armenians in America, From Being to Feeling Armenian. And differing experiences of members of a diaspora, when did they come, from where, under what circumstances, can lead to complex cultural tensions. Under most circumstances in a diaspora, such as the Armenians in Lebanon, your nationality or ethnicity is more or less forced upon you. Lebanon is one of the many countries of the world where people are clearly divided by ethnicity, religion, and language. To cease to be an Armenian in Lebanon, one has to take on a new identity, if that is possible. Can an Armenian in Lebanon simply morph into a Shiite Muslim? Obviously not. Assimilation, or the process of losing one's original identity and ethnicity, including all of its cultural and linguistic characteristics, varies from country to country according to many factors, but particularly the availability of a large, relatively undefined melting pot, a place where people throw off their inherited characteristics and adopt a new amorphous culture within the state. A place like America. In contrast to places like Lebanon and Syria, an Armenian in America can rather easily assimilate and lose their Armenian characteristics, including language and inherited culture, as some in my family clearly did. Since being an Armenian is not imposed by society, it becomes a personal choice, namely, feeling Armenian. The process of assimilation depends both on the predominant culture as well as the characteristics of the diaspora. The longevity of a diaspora depends on many things, but chiefly on density, culture, wealth, and numbers. 400 years is a long time, and the subsequent waves of immigration continued to infuse the established community with new blood that kept the diaspora strong. Wealthy diasporas, which give status to its members and provide the means for retaining high culture, tend to last longer than the diaspora struggling to make a living. My husband's family illustrates this latter point. His father, Nahabed, came to America in the early 1920s to seek his fortune. At the docks in New York, where he landed, like my great-great-uncle Krikor 40 years earlier, hustlers were offering jobs to the newcomers, this time in the cotton mills of Georgia rather than the wineries of New York. Dennis's father took the train ticket, went to Augusta, Georgia, walked into the cotton mill, and then walked out. He had not come to America to work in such a dingy and suffocating environment. He went out on his own and earned enough money to return to Constantinople to find an Armenian bride. 2 of his brothers also came to America. One got a job somewhere in Tennessee, married a local woman, and disappeared into the American mainstream. The second brother married a Greek woman and was assimilated into the Greek diaspora in America. Nahabed and his bride, Armenian, raised 2 boys and 2 girls in Augusta until the girls reached the age of dating. And Armenian then insisted vehemently that they move to an area with an Armenian community where the girls could meet and marry Armenians. At great financial sacrifice, Dennis's family moved north from Augusta to the Detroit area, where they began to attend St. John's Armenian Church, and indeed, both daughters did marry Armenians. Where there is no community, assimilation is rapid. Where there is a community, there are possibilities. And so both Dennis and I were fortunate that our families moved to areas with other Armenians. For me, to Fresno and then Los Angeles. For Dennis, to Detroit, so that they were able to stay close to the Armenian community while others in our family drifted away. So this leads to another question, which I hesitate to deal with, but I will. Who is an Armenian? Suggested that a little earlier. It is fairly clear that a person born in the Armenian Republic and who carries Armenian citizenship and who identifies as an Armenian is an Armenian. We can all agree on that. Are those of a different ethnicity who were born in Armenia and who carry Armenian citizenship also to be considered Armenian? The conventional answer is no. Russian Old Believers who have a village in Armenia, who were born there and carry Armenian citizenship, are not considered Armenians by themselves or others. So the question is more complicated than that. Are the Hamshans, the Armenian-speaking villagers of Turkey who are Muslim, to be considered Armenian? That is a contemporary question that is still being analyzed and debated. Should the children of second or third generation Armenian immigrants who are Armenian-Americans be called Armenians? When you write the history of Armenians in America, to what generation do you still consider Americans to be Armenian? I will cut to the chase, because I can unpack that forever. But I'm sure many of you won't be satisfied with the answer. When I say in the final analysis, an Armenian is someone who claims to be Armenian and who other Armenians accept as being Armenian. But sometimes the conditions of acceptance can be defined differently by those who represent different patterns of immigration. So let me illustrate by a corollary. My daughter Marie, who had just graduated a year ago from high school, wanted to be an intern in Washington and was accepted by the ANCA. She was housed with other interns and was regularly included in all of their activities. Now Marie is very likable, and the other interns grew fond of her, but they could not understand why she didn't speak Armenian. You act like an Armenian, you can think like an Armenian, you work for the cause as an Armenian, but you can't speak Armenian. What makes you an Armenian? Now, Marie was not so much offended as confounded. These other kids, by historical accident, being first or second generation Armenian-Americans, came from Armenian-speaking homes and thus learned the language. Marie, who, as I've described on my side of the family, was fifth generation Armenian-American. Her great-great-great-uncle first coming to America in 1879, and her great-great-grandmother 10 years later, did not come from an Armenian-speaking home, but, I insist, one that treasured its ethnicity nonetheless. My mother taught English at an Armenian school for nearly 30 years, and she and my father were very active in Armenian circles, having been involved in significant community projects, like the Armenian Genocide Memorial in Montebello, and the Armenian History Timeline project etched on the sidewalk outside this building, just to name two. That love for things Armenian they passed on to me, a love which I share with my husband and that we have transmitted to our children. Well, Scrappy Marie decided to analyze the issue in writing, which she then submitted to an Armenian-American press for possible publication. The article was published, and we were amazed by the large number, indeed hundreds, of supporting correspondence she received via the web and in writing. As one might expect, this is a burning issue in many quarters, especially among Armenian Americans of the third and fourth and fifth generations. So to understand Armenians in America, one must recognize that first immigration came in ripples, and thereafter in various waves related to the condition in the old country and contemporary immigration laws in America, which varied over time. In fact, periodization of the history of Armenian immigration to America reveals various aspects of our experience, including the social conflict engendered by new waves of immigration washing over the established diaspora. The new immigrants generally considered themselves more Armenian than the old immigrants, since supposedly the new immigrants carried more authentic characteristics of ethnic Armenians, and particularly the Armenian language. Of course, some of this was true, since in the Middle East, diaspora's assimilation was not a large issue. But the question that arises is how much cultural continuity is necessary to define ethnic identity. Could it possibly be that speaking Armenian was no longer a necessary ethnic marker on the American scene? Those who feel Armenian would answer with a resounding yes, while newcomers would feel just as strongly in the opposite direction. While silk breeders and cloth makers like Martin were brought over with the early colonists, it was the vast American missionary movement in historic Armenia in the 19th century that resulted in some young men being sent over to America to study theology and medicine, two professions that would be useful back in the homeland as well as in America. Of course, the Hamidian massacres of the 1890s initiated the first wave, with many of these having been able to reach California and the Central Valley, which so much resembled the land in the homeland. This was the path of my mother's maternal grandmother. The story I began with was that of her father, not her mother, who arrived in New York through Ellis Island by herself in the mid-1890s after witnessing the massacres in Malatya that killed her father and uncles. Once she was able to save enough money working as a housekeeper to bring her mother and younger siblings over from Malatya to join her, the family came west to Fresno, where my grandmother was born. Others, of course, found jobs in the factories of New York and New Jersey, as well as in places such as Worcester, Massachusetts, and later Detroit, Michigan, and Racine, Wisconsin, while others became rug merchants or opened small businesses. Another significant wave, the one we usually consider, followed the dreadful genocide in Turkey from 1915 to 1923. And once more, the immigrants, for the most part, were refugees and orphans. Other waves followed the civil war in Lebanon, the disruption in various Arab countries, the immigration from the Soviet Union, and the fall of the Shah in Iran. And finally, the fall of the Soviet Union, successive waves of immigration that I experienced throughout my childhood. These immigrants, for the most part, were no longer piteous refugees, but involved, educated people, including many wealthy Armenians from the upper classes. Each of these waves brought its problems and opportunities, some of which confront us even today. Interestingly, it was the earthquake in Armenia in 1988 that caused many Armenian-Americans who had been only lightly connected to the community to feel Armenian. Not only was the established community energized by the earthquake and the desire to send aid to their kinsmen in desperate need, but many people of Armenian extraction who were already nearly assimilated came out of the woodwork, so to speak, and did yeoman charitable and relief work. The fall of the Soviet Union also allowed large numbers of Armenians to emigrate, a rather large number coming to the United States and eventually settling here in California, and many congregating in Glendale. The cultural differences between long-established Armenians and the newly arrived Armenians was vastly different from those from the old immigration, which was largely Western or Turkish Armenian. And of course, one of the chief differences was between the newcomers who spoke Eastern Armenian and the established diaspora, which spoke Western Armenian. In all frankness, I must mention the unfortunate political and church division between large elements of the early diaspora, particularly after the fall of the First Armenian Republic, and we'll be celebrating the centennial of that event this year, well, of the founding, not the fall. To my mind, outside elements exaggerated the difference in their own interests and not in the interests of the Armenian people. Fortunately, that wound is almost healed, and the community is more or less presenting a united front on larger political issues. For many years, we collected oral histories of Armenian survivors, which today comprise a viable part of our legacy. But now we should think seriously of video recording personal histories of Armenian immigrants in general. In my opinion, the more we involve people in preserving our legacy in various ways, the richer will our diasporan culture become and encourage mutual understanding among the various waves of immigration that have arrived recently on these shores and those who arrived generations earlier. And a conference such as this is a valuable part of that effort. So I'll end with a personal story to illustrate some of the challenges of living in a variated diaspora. Having grown up in a family long settled in Southern California, and despite my having an immigrant Greek-Armenian father, my earliest memories are of a pretty regular American suburban life here in the San Fernando Valley. The only real Armenian flavor was what we experienced with family, and especially my father's family, which had more recently immigrated to America and thus was far less assimilated. And through our church community at what was, of course, the United Armenian Congregational Church, and our regular yearly visits to the Armenian Genocide Memorial in Montebello on April 24th. It wasn't until the early 1970s, when my mother began teaching at FIRST ARMENIAN and my brothers and I enrolled, that we became more fully immersed in the Armenian community, thus stemming the tide of assimilation for at least another generation. And it's often these moments that just turn the direction of one's life. It was also through that experience that we came to know firsthand the challenges of the multiple waves of immigration. So I'm hopeful that with a strong and vibrant independent Republic of Armenia, and make no mistake, we must work hard to ensure that it becomes such a homeland. Our richly layered and dynamic Armenian community in America will continue to deepen its understanding and respect for all parts of the community, those that can trace themselves back to Martin and those who have come only recently. It is this hope and this common heritage that brings all of us together here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Papazian. That really sums up a lot of what this weekend is about. And as I think back, growing up myself in a small town in New Hampshire, not a hotbed of the Armenian community, in case you're wondering, Dover, New Hampshire. I can't say I spent a lot of time pondering my Armenian identity, but I have pondered it quite a bit since then, and I think back to what it was growing up that made me feel Armenian, and it's exceedingly complicated. But I think it's probably no coincidence that in this town of about 25,000 people, of which maybe 15 were Armenian, in my neighborhood, there was the Mamikonian family, us. There were the Kasabians. There were my grandparents, the Parnagians. And just a couple hundred feet away, the Seranians. That was sort of the Armenian community of Dover, New Hampshire. And of course, our other neighbors included several Greek families, inevitably, because that's just the way these things work out. In all communities, they tend to replicate themselves. So thank you for those reflections on Armenian identity, Armenian-American identity, and what it really is that we're here to talk about and think about this weekend. Well, next, how fortunate I am to have the privilege of introducing Dr. Haik Demoyan twice in the same week, separated only by 3,000 miles, 4 days, and 1 blizzard. Dr. Demoyan is the director of the Armenian Genocide Museum and Institute in Yerevan, and he is presently a U.S. Fulbright visiting scholar at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Harvard University, where he is researching the identity transformation processes in the South Caucasus, which was indeed the topic for his lecture at Nasser earlier this week. He is also a chief editor of the International Journal of Armenian Genocide Studies, printed since 2014, and he is the author of at least 15 books in Armenian, Russian, and English, many of which are available over there, including among them The Armenian Genocide, front page coverage in the world media,
Foreign Policy of Turkey and the Karabakh Conflict, Armenian Sports and Athletics in the Ottoman Empire, Western media coverage of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and of course, the newly published and beautiful Armenian Legacy in America, a 400-year heritage. So to talk about that project, please welcome Dr. Haik Demoyan.
Thank you so much. So what happened within last week? Well, first of all, բարի երեկո. Good evening. Շնորհակալ եմ, որ այսօր երեկոյան միացել եք մեզ եւ շնորհակալ եմ կանխավ, որ վաղը նույնպես կմիանաք մեզ, որովհետեւ վաղը հետաքրքիր լինելու. So I'm going to make my speech in English, of course, but I think Armenian language is important also to hear in this country, and that's why few sentences is important. So what happened within last week? I had my lecture postponed because of nice New England weather. My flight was canceled on March 13, and today night I forgot to turn off alarm of Bostonian time. It's too much for a week, but I'm really happy because I can touch this. This is really a different feeling when you print a book on a distance. You know, I will tell the story at the end of what happened in my family because it's family business too, family outcome. But always going to the libraries, checking all auctions, buying constantly, day by day, to enrich and to have professional, high-quality photos, wasting a lot of money, of course. This is another story. But when you print your 15th book, but you have the same feeling like the first one came out. So this is another feeling because you are here, but your book will be printed some thousands of miles away in Armenia. It's a different feeling, but you feel that your baby is born in a mother country. So it's another really interesting moment. When people Skyped me showing the book, I wanted to touch, but it was too far from me. And you see your book, your baby, just born, but you cannot touch it. And finally, in New York, I hold this first copy while speaking at AGBU Center. When 3 copies were out of the book, my deputy called me from Yerevan and said, "Mr. Demoyan, this is amazing. What kind of job will you do?" And he said, "We got 3 copies only because print house cannot supply us with hundreds. Still, they print and bind, so it's huge work. It's 2.5 kilos." And when first copies were available, only 3. He also wrote me an email because I'm in touch with my personnel at the museum. He said, "You know, Mr. Demoyan, delegation of American Air Force will visit Armenian Genocide Museum. What we should do?" And I said, "Just a reminder, you are a clever boy. My book is out. It's not only for Armenians, it's also for Americans." And he said, "Yes, but only 3 we have." Of course, give them one. Give one to the head of delegation. And on the next day, he was very pathetic, said, "You know," and I said specifically, open the page in chapter 4 where Armenian pilots are depicted, Second World War, and show Americans that we know how to fly on Corsairs, on Douglases, on B-52s, and being gunners, pilots, etc., being part of American history. And this book is part of Americana study. This is also part of Armenian studies. So book has 2 identities. It is important. And this is the outcome of many ideas and many of my thoughts why we are not represented. We are not represented in the museums. I visited a lot of museums in Washington, in other places. Well, even in souvenir shops, when you cannot find something related to your history, to your identity, you are kind of missing there, symbolic absence. So my high question that time was, if not a museum, unfortunately that time we got the sad news from the Washington Museum, the building was sold out, so no chance to put it in a permanent exhibition. Why not to start and work intensively on a project? But this was one idea, but earlier, as a historian, I can track the idea when the initial idea came to me to work on this. It was a very modest task to find out 50 documents, 50 photos, and 50 artifacts, and to put together nearly 150 pages book, and that's it. And why and when to print it, while working on a permanent exhibition at the Genocide Museum, we decided to put all memorabilia and ephemera we had on American Near East relief in a separate room. It was important because it was a huge humanitarian intervention on behalf of Armenians, Armenian orphans, to show the world. Armenians also must know, and American visitors we always have every year. And then suddenly on the next year, in 2016, as Mark told you, I said, I took the book of Hagop Deranian, and I found out that it's 1618, and after 2 years it's 2018. And why not? Why not to extend the study of American Near East relief? The idea was initially to print a book, a catalog of large collection we have on American Near East relief. And then it started. You know, when I say, when at the museum, at the meetings, I say, I have an idea, my personal say, oh no. When I say, I have an idea to do something, they knew that I will drive at the end. I will go and fulfill that project. So my idea is makes a lot of troubles, but anyway, I'm really pleased, and many people are pleased with the outcome. So this is really makes me happy. This is not a one-man show, honestly, because as Mark told, I came with the idea to do something for 400th anniversary. It was October 2016. It was a talk in Mark's car, just driving from airport to the hotel. Actually, not hotel. It was a private house, also related to American history. Then I was back right 1 year ago, in March 25 last year, to work in museums, in the collections, private and other institutions. So intensive work in collections. Also here, I flew to California in 2016. Intensively, I started also to collect as a museum man, as a person who know how to find items. So this is also technology, it's also big methodology and science, how to track Armenian-related or American-Armenian-related stuff in various sources available, mostly on eBay. And it started. You have to take one Armenian surname, for example, Karagyozian, with the 5 different spellings, and every day put and search, and got it. Photos, 300 photos I have in my personal collection now. Mostly photos are here, but because of size, I just put aside for second edition probably. A lot of artifacts. Well, I have to say and confess that I was kind of lucky, because within 1 year, so many precious things, exceptional artifacts, it was possible to buy and accumulate. It's really in a safe place now, waiting for time to be exhibited in a permanent exhibitions or temporary exhibitions. Partly they are on display together with our Eskijan Museum collection. I don't want to tell the story and the 5 chapters. I just want to single out a couple of stories which really amazed me. As a historian, as a scholar involved in Armenian studies, yes, I was puzzled, I was saddened, I was really happy to find and track the stories of artifacts and the stories in general. For example, we are speaking about First Armenian who came to Virginia, and it's on records of London, Virginia Company, fortunately all digitized now and available. But this year is also another celebration. We know the name of person, we even have picture printed 200 years ago. 250 years ago, in 1768, First Armenian came to California, to West Coast. And the story which is here is amazing. It's amazing survivor story. How because of ocean storm, instead of sailing from Singapore to Europe, because of storm, the ship appeared on Californian shores, and he saved all the crew and the families of merchants, European merchants. He found a way to bring the wrecked ship to the California. Another occasion to celebrate, exactly this year, 250 years ago, we know the guy named Johann Ara Babigyan, and he printed a book in memory of Columbus. He ordered a translation of English language book, 4-volume book called History of America, and the Mekhitarist fathers in Trieste, which is part of now in Italy, printed Armenian translation in 1780s together with his picture next to the picture of Columbus. It's very nice. You will see that there. Another story which amazed me, it's the first mentioning of George Washington in Armenian printed book. But this book is not a simple book. And it was printed in India back in 1773 by Shahamish Shahamirian, merchant and intellectual. What is the book about? But the title is very interesting, Vorogait Parats. And this is kind of first constitution of future Armenia. Seated in India, people were thinking about democratic republic with the king, and they wrote and printed first Armenian constitution, yes, before American constitution was done. And in preamble, Shamir Shamirian is writing about the struggle occurring here in this country. And he's saying, one person called Washington started struggle for freedom. Imagine, in 1773, mentioning of George Washington in Armenian constitution, of what supposedly was designed to be constitution of the first Armenian statehood. And the initial idea started to grow. So we decided to stop at 500, then 550 pages, then 600 maximum. With my wife, she was designer and she made the layout of this book. And she said one day, you know, if you do not stop at 600, your book will be very heavy, I can promise you. So, okay, I said 620, no more. It was like an auction. And a lot of stories, a lot of materials are left. And now on my desktop in an apartment in Watertown, I have proud folder with a proud name called second edition. So all the things left is there. So waiting for their own time, and I hope that chance will come very soon. We'll have extended, I don't know how to say it, extended for this book, but extended enriched edition, if not this year, but maybe next year. We'll see. We'll find another Martin Armenian to celebrate. At least records say 1618 or probably 1619, so we have a chance. A lot of things really makes me happy when I track them, when I touch the items in the museum collections. Forgotten, yes, I would like to use that word. Some of them were left in the boxes, considered as not important. Some of them were really in safe hands. And I found approximately 30, 40 volumes of Armenian language printed books not mentioned and not included in general catalog of Armenian book catalog. Can you imagine within a year to find 40 titles absolutely considered unknown it's huge. When I tracked handwritten newspapers, I was amazed. People here, because of lack of money and financial aid, they started to issue periodicals, handwritten, in New York, in Lynn, Massachusetts. This is quite amazing. But the striking item was occasionally found. Actually, I had a draft photo 5 years ago. I did the Armenian Library Museum in Watertown. I showed, please find this. It was a black framed 3 photos, small photos of Armenian ladies, and on the bottom there was an Armenian text, Mi mornak mes, 1910. You know, first men came to this country to earn money and to send to their families in Armenia, and probably it was a really sensitive moment for me. Nearly my eyes were in tears when I found that finally, after a week-long searches, and I hold it and started to take a picture of this. It is in a book, you can see that. Another very emotional moment while writing this, I knew about one important item in the Armenian Genocide Museum. It is a US Medical Department towel cut into 2 parts. While in Alexandropol orphanage in the country I was born, brother and sister decided to cut the towel from American orphanage. If they lose connection, they can find each other later after. And they did find each other, and now towel is connected and is in our collection in the museum. Next to that is an artifact photo. Next to that there are 2 exceptional shots how brother and sister, after losing each other 50 years, they're connected here in the United States. How 2 brothers, again in the United States, in Pasadena, they found each other. Well, I can talk a lot about 2,200 illustrations, but since we are lucky to have these illustrations on the walls, I don't want to go deep and bring a lot of stories. You have book available, you can enjoy. Today I gave 1 book to my friend in Glendale, and I was sitting half an hour in front of him, and he said, "Հայկ, կներես չեմ կրնա երեսիդ նայել, որովհետև քիչ շատ հետաքրքիր է." And half an hour he started to browse 620 pages listing. Really, it was 30 minutes I'm seated, and he listed all the book without looking into my face, and they started to talk afterwards. Important moment of my presentation. It's to say thank you to those who helped me with this project. Believe me, within 1 year to write a book of this size and with the amount of illustrations, visual data, checking, visiting, asking for ride to next city of Worcester, where Armenian concentration was 4 times. One person was forced. Actually, he was happy with this project, and he became impassioned. He started also to do some historical research, 4 times driving to Worcester to check materials, to open cases, etc. It's an interesting study. First of all, I would like to thank persons, then institutions. Mark Mamigonian, who provided greatest help, and he was kind of inspiration, because also he shared with me family photos, family artifacts, and I knew the value of them, and they're in the book as immigrant stories. Magi Goshin, well, what can I say? I can say a lot of words to this person with whom I collaborate many years, and the outcome of this conference, I would like to say that this will be a historical conference tomorrow, and I'm happy we have exhibition, we have conference, and we have book, and we have also pin, by the way, important reminder, since the concept of the pin is mine, is not for propagating smoking, because there is a tobacco leaf the eagle is holding, so it's not a propagation of smoking, be careful. It's just a reminder of Martin, the Armenian's legacy, because he came and he started to grow tobacco. And it was one of the success stories, actually. First Armenian and first success story. He was a servant and he became a businessman, went to London to sell tobacco. I would like also to thank Dr. Shavash Christian, who helped me hiddenly, I would say in that way, but he knows how great investment in that book was really important for me. I would like to thank Raj Harnesian, Misak Kileshan, who provided valuable items and the photos. I would like to thank Raj Uziboyukian, who provided one important, very important, actually the first illustration. When you open, you will see the rock original is here in exhibition with George Washington in the middle, and the sign by Armenians who made it. Well, this was really adventure to write the book with the 2,200, more than 2,200 illustrations, but I found myself in a different world, and I started to navigate. I became archaeologist of American Armenian history, but I do not want to pretend that I'm a pioneer, because many people did great job in preservation of history. Mark mentioned about Hagop Martin the Iranian. This guy is really champion in preserving American Armenian history and memory. And I would like also to thank Ardeskijan Museum, Nasser, Armenian Museum of America, Armenian churches in Worcester and the Boston area. I would like to thank a number of American also institutions, Salvation Army Museum in New York, Bostonian Society. I would like also to thank Project SAFE. Special thanks goes to Nubar and Anna Afeyan Foundation, who kindly agreed to print this book on behalf of Aurora Humanitarian Initiative. They supported with publication. And the last but not least, I would like to thank my wife, Lucine. She is online now, asking me always what is going on there, watching me with an old guy with Washington costume, what's going on. It was not reported. She did great job, actually. Really, she did great job. And my daughter, Anna, also deserves special gratitude from dad and mom, because when we were hanged on phone, speaking with the print house in Yerevan, print these, colors are different, the size is this, cover design, it happens also with all this stress and stressful situation before your book goes to the print. And she was watching cartoons, and suddenly she came in the room where computers were set, and he shouted in Armenian, "Gishkatabek, Gishkatabek," and decided that this is the deadline. Thank you very much, and enjoy.
Thank you, Haig. And please, everybody, take a look at the book. You'll see hundreds, if not thousands, of things in this book that you've never seen before, things that you couldn't have imagined even exist, or can't imagine that they've been preserved through all of these years. And this is a subject of great interest to me, and when Haig gave me a copy of the book and I started looking through it, even having been with him through the journey of this book, I was dumbstruck at some of the things that he has collected from many institutions, from many individuals, and from his own collection. And as you go through the book and see the number of items that say Haig de Moyen collection, you think, well, either Haig has a very big house or a very understanding wife, or both, perhaps. Second, I think, only. So please check it out. It's an extraordinary item, and there's never been a book like this. And there won't be another one like it until the second edition. So we're lucky to be here tonight again to see a video especially made for this occasion by Mr. Peter Masurlian, who I know has worked very hard and on a very tight schedule to complete this video. Peter is a two-time Los Angeles area Emmy Award-winning journalist who produces, shoots, reports, writes, narrates, and edits his own short-form and long-form stories, videos, and documentaries. About half of Peter's prolific output has Armenian themes, including The Long Journey from the NFL to Armenia, The 100-Year-Old Survivor, and Historic Armenia, all of which were seen in prime time on Los Angeles PBS station KLCS. Peter has just completed the film's Holocaust Soliloquy to be shown on KLCS in May, and he is in post-production on Genocide March Revisited, which will appear next year. We're very grateful to him for having taken on the special assignment of making a video for this evening about Armenian Americans in politics. So I'd like to ask Peter to please stand and be recognized. Peter. So now we will see the video.
This kind of music played on the oud goes back centuries, back to the old country, as the old-timers like to say. But on the streets of Glendale, it's a fairly recent phenomenon by historical measurements. We don't know if the parents of Paul Ignatius blasted the music of Western Armenia on their Victrola in the early 1920s, but we do know his family was one of the first Armenian families in Glendale, a city that now boasts about 100,000 Armenian Americans, nearly half the city's population. In his recent memoir, Ignatius, now 97, was a trailblazer in public service among Armenian Americans, serving as the Secretary of the Navy under President Lyndon Johnson. That fact, along with having served as a commissioned naval officer during World War II, led to a distinction not many can put on their resumes, having a U.S. Navy destroyer named after him. Another first among many for Paul Ignatius. So in looking back 100 years, we recognize the Ignatius family as one of Glendale's first. But it was Martin the Armenian who was the first Armenian to arrive in America in 1618, 400 years ago. Stepan Partamyan, Armenian-American historian and social critic, recently compiled a 2,000-page book on the accomplishments of Armenian Americans, most achieved over the past 150 years, when 98% of them and their ancestors came to America. Their accomplishments stand out in academia, the arts, sports, law, media, medicine, and science. But it's really only over the past 50 years that Armenian Americans have found their footing in politics, more specifically in elective office.
It was over 120 years ago that my family arrived here in the United States. And even at that time, in Worcester, Massachusetts, one of my ancestors was an organizer, a political organizer. And the reason was that the Armenian immigrants were getting beaten up by the Norwegian immigrants who had come before them because they were taking their jobs and so on. And the police were very often siding with those who were already here against the Armenians. And one of my ancestors, Krikorian, stood up in a town meeting, and it's reported in the newspapers at the time. He says, "There's 500 of us here. If you give me 500 men and we go and show up at City Hall, then we'll see who they listen to." And the same was true in the 1890s as is true now in the 21st century. If we don't show up and participate, then we'll get left behind.
Los Angeles City Council member Paul Krikorian has been the most successful in local government, elected in America's second most populous city. We counted more than 30 other city council members over the years, from Massachusetts to Torrance, from New York to Montebello, and Illinois to Pasadena. Glendale, of course, is now the epicenter of Armenians in local government, with 4 of the city's 5 council members being Armenian-Americans. Also Armenian and elected Glendale officials are the city treasurer and the city clerk, who was a young activist years ago when he first approached the woman who held the position he now holds.
There was an Armenian candidate running for city council, and when we approached the city clerk at the time and said, you know, hey, we want materials translated to Armenian because most of the voters who are Armenian, for them English is not their first language, and if you're translating it to Spanish for the Spanish speakers to be able to understand, then it makes only sense that in Glendale, a city of roughly 35 to 40% population of Armenian origin, that you also translate it to Armenian. And the response given was that, well, you're considered Caucasian or white, and you know, you're not part of the federally mandated languages that we're required to translate it in, and you know, good luck.
There have been a number of state legislators of Armenian descent on the East Coast, like New Jersey's Chuck Haitayan and Massachusetts Speaker George Kavarian, but no state can point to the numbers in California, starting with Wally Karabian in the early 70s, who at one time served as his party's assembly leader and a role model to so many who came after him: Chuck Pachigian, Joe Samidian, Howard Kalugian, Greg Agazarian, Steve Samuelian, and Khacho Achachian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Currently, there's only one Armenian-American in elective office in all of Sacramento, Audrey Nazarian.
For me, it was important to make sure that Armenian nonprofit organizations that serve the community well are also recognized by the state and are appropriately supported by the state. So I'm very proud of having secured funding for LARC Music Society, which trains hundreds of kids on a daily basis. And I was very proud to kick off the support for the Armenian Museum by securing the first $1 million.
State Senator Anthony Portantino also helped get state money for the Armenian-American Museum, for which they'll break ground in Glendale in 2019. Portantino is not Armenian, but he represents more Armenian Americans than any other politician from a legislative district in the country. Earlier this year at Brand Library in Glendale, Portantino sponsored an event on the status of women in Armenia, one of many such issues on which he's been a leader.
Whether it's the Artsakhi economy, or trying to create more trade opportunities between California and Yerevan. Again, there's a natural fit between the Armenian businesses in California, in particular in my district, and those economic opportunities in Artsakh and in Yerevan.
Before getting elected to serve in Sacramento, Assemblyman Nazarian served on the staffs of a council member and a congressman. Before that, he was a campaign consultant for a successful Glendale City Council candidate, among others.
In the Armenian community, one of the reasons why I felt it was so important, for example, for there to be a council member in Glendale, was because when you looked at the police and fire departments and you saw that there were many hardworking police officers and firefighters, but unfortunately didn't speak the language, if they're going to be addressing an emergency and if someone's life is on the line by a few seconds, and if they can't, language is becoming a barrier, well, what is the city doing to make sure that they're addressing those issues? So it becomes a life and death issue.
If there's anyone who has been the most influential behind the scenes in Glendale for the longest period of time, building a campaign infrastructure, a political machine really, it's Ellen Asatrian.
For me, it's never been really about power for myself, but empowering our community to have a voice, and any really marginalized community to have a voice in their government. And so with that respect, I've always selected candidates that I truly believed would make that difference.
We met Asatrian at Sardarabad bookstore in Glendale, a city she's worked in since arriving in America from Yerevan as a tween. By the age of 15, she was working on Rafi Manoukian's successful 1999 Glendale City Council race. Since then, it's been candidates for school board, the state legislature, and Congress. Along the way, she made time to work for a combined 11 years as the executive director of the Armenian National Committee of America's Glendale chapter and as the executive director of the ANCA's entire Western region. She started High Votes in 2012, and by 2017, High Votes had registered 50,000 Armenian Americans in Los Angeles County.
We are the margin vote, and so we now become a powerhouse with respect to candidates and elected officials that, whether they like to or not, are now paying attention to us and the issues that are important to us. And at the end of the day, that's what really matters. I've always told our community members that, you know, it doesn't begin or end with elections, right? Somebody that's already elected into office needs to get re-elected. And in order for them to actually pay attention to you, they need to see that you have the numbers at the ballot box. And if not at the ballot box, then you at least need to be writing checks and creating partnerships with other community groups to create a voting bloc.
This is the Armenian Church in Scottsdale, Arizona, where a DC-based political advocacy group, the Armenian Assembly, was on hand over President's Day weekend to hold a town hall meeting at the local church hall to educate and motivate the Armenian-American grassroots.
The Armenian Assembly is a nonpartisan advocacy organization, so that means we work across the aisles. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat or independent. We focus on the issues, and the issues are strengthening the U.S.-Armenian relationship, making sure that politicians and their staff understand the challenges that Armenia faces, whether it's the blockades of Turkey and Azerbaijan, the war rhetoric and the war that's happening that Azerbaijan has launched against Armenia. You know, those are the types of issues that we focus on.
The Armenian Assembly has also trained summer college interns in Washington, D.C. for decades.
I think it's important to be active, however that is. It could be in the church, it could be in Washington, D.C., it could be in your local community. There's so many different ways to be active. One of the things I think the Armenian Assembly is done very well and can be very proud of is its internship program for over 40 years now, and over 1,000 interns from all across the country, all stripes of life, getting involved in all types of different areas afterwards, whether it's in politics, whether it's in journalism, whether it's in law. There's a great opportunity for Armenian Americans to come to Washington, D.C. and really get a unique, life-changing experience.
The Armenian National Committee of America, also based in the nation's capital, has an internship program that focuses on fighting specifically for Armenian causes.
Because we have a worldwide diaspora, and the largest community of the worldwide Armenian diaspora is right here in Southern California, it's very important for us to have our collective voices heard in the halls of government and policy making and so on. And as a political force, we can influence American policy and have successfully influenced American policy in that we have been able to secure funding and foreign aid from the United States government for the dual republics of Armenia and Artsakh. We've been able to call for Turkey to be brought to justice, and we've gotten a lot of traction on that. Haven't reached our goals yet, but eventually we will. And we've just been able to mobilize and organize our communities to integrate within American society while at the same time maintaining our cultural identity and our history.
At a fundraiser at the Pasadena home of Rafi Hamparian, the national chairman of the ANCA, Congressman David Valadeo from California's Central Valley was brought in to talk about a recent fact-finding trip he made to Armenia, accompanied by Hamparian.
So it was a really quick trip, and the Armenian folks were very, very helpful in making sure that I had a very full schedule and got to see quite a bit in 2 full days. I left California, flew to Yerevan and landed. The ambassador from the U.S. was there waiting for me. We had an opportunity to visit the Genocide Memorial, visited some schools, met with some locals, got on a helicopter, flew over to Nagorno-Karabakh, met with some folks in the legislature there, got a little briefing, did some interviews, and got a briefing from Halo Trust on some of the demining activities they've got and how they're doing it.
There has never been an Armenian-American elected to the U.S. Senate, and only 6 have been elected to the U.S. House. Stephen Darunian of New York was the first in 1953, and Californians remember Fresno's Chip Pashayan, who was in office from 1979 to 1991. 2 other former congressmen were Adam Benjamin of Indiana and John Sweeney of New York. And currently there are 2 long-serving, high-profile Bay Area California women in the U.S. Congress, Anna Eshoo and Jackie Spear. But if you had to name the most successful elected official of Armenian descent, it would have to be Kurkan George Dukmajian, who was elected to the California State Assembly, the State Senate, 1 term as the state's Attorney General, and 2 terms as the Governor of California. During his 8 years as governor, Dukmajian appointed hundreds of municipal and superior court judges, as well as 2 Armenian Americans to the California State Supreme Court.
City officials and dignitaries from all over the state came out to dedicate the new Long Beach courthouse. And the guest of honor was the man whose name is on the building, former Governor George Dukmajian.
Absolutely blown away.
And if Dukmajian is the most accomplished elected official among all Armenian Americans, the guy pictured here, Ken Kachigian, has a record as a political operative that's second to none, with Governor Dukmajian and 2 presidents among those he's worked for. We caught up with Kachigian here at his law office in San Clemente. In the late 1970s, he spent 4 years here working closely with former President Richard Nixon on his memoirs. This was the beach of Nixon's Western White House. Kachigian has an Ivy League law degree and has written speeches for Presidents Nixon and Reagan. But don't get the impression he started life on third base.
Well, I grew up in Visalia, which is about 35 miles south of Fresno. I grew up on a 60-acre farm of walnuts and grapes. Dad was a genocide survivor and was born in central Turkey in a little village called Çomaklı in the province of Kayseri. His village was purged in 1915, and in 1918 I lost my grandmother, my uncle, and my aunt, and my dad survived.
It was at UC Santa Barbara that Kachigian honed his skills to become a great writer. But that college freshman in 1962 was not quite ready for the White House.
Well, the secret is that I had to take what we call bonehead English in UC Santa Barbara. I couldn't really write a declarative sentence. And so it was called subject A English, but that was a fancy term, but it was bonehead English, and because I flunked the entrance essay on writing.
While Kachigian was at Columbia Law School, he applied for a job on the Nixon for President campaign. He started out at the bottom of the totem pole, but by the time Nixon was president, Kachigian was on the speechwriting team.
To go from driving a tractor in the vineyard in Visalia when you're 12 years old to sitting in the Oval Office and listening to the president instruct you on what he wanted to say, it's a pretty big deal.
And it was an Armenian-American who single-handedly inserted the term Armenian genocide in a Ronald Reagan Holocaust proclamation in 1981, Ken Kachigian. Like the genocide of the Armenians before it and the genocide of the Cambodians which followed it, and like too many other such persecutions of too many other peoples, the lessons of the Holocaust must never be forgotten.
I didn't want to try to slip something under the table or be sneaky about it at all. And so I went through the proper channels to make sure. Now, perhaps if this had gone to the State Department, there may have been another concern. Now, having said all this, after that statement was put out, there was a lot of consternation and whatnot. But, the world didn't come to the end. The world has never come to the end after that statement was said. And diplomatic relations didn't end. And our bases in Turkey were not removed. And so I don't think the world would end if President Trump would stand up and observe the Armenian genocide.
I think in the American political system, Armenian Americans, like every other American, need to be involved, because if we're not involved, we're left out of all of the important decisions that get made in American democracy.
You know, we're always involved in a David and Goliath fight because we are a very small community compared to other communities or compared to the United States society in general. But because we're so passionate of our cause and because we're so well organized and committed to our cause, we have been able to really make our voices heard in every level of government, from the federal on down to the most local grassroots level. And in doing so, we've been able to build a reputation that has been repeatedly calling us the second most effective ethnic lobby in the United States, second only to the Jewish lobby.
For as long as we have people that care about these issues, that want to see the survival of our people, so we're not just a footnote of history, we need to be active, not only in the homeland, but also in nations that afford us the opportunity to make our voice heard and be responsible citizens, be that in the United States, be that in France, be that in Australia, wherever it may be. It is no different than what other communities have done, like Jewish Americans have done, like Latino Americans have done, and it is what makes, I think, America a stronger nation by giving us that opportunity.
Peter, thank you so much for that. That was great. I'm informed that as of 2 weeks ago, the city manager in Glendale is now also an Armenian. And I would also like to acknowledge the presence here of Councilman Krikorian. I would like to ask him to please stand and thank you. The video reminded me too of something that Dr. Papazian was reflecting on earlier, and that's the unbroken chain that connects us to the earliest Armenian Americans. And there are certain people that probably all of us get to know in our lives who connect us to this history. And I'm thinking of people like Dr. Duranian, who I mentioned earlier, or Professor Hovhannisyan, who will be with us tomorrow, or Paul Ignatius, who was mentioned in the video, who I've had the pleasure to get to know. And when I talk to Paul Ignatius, I feel like, you know, a door is opening directly onto the history of the United States, the history of the Armenian-American community, and so many things, not to mention that there's a U.S. naval destroyer named after him, which is, I think, unique among people in my acquaintance. One of the people that Paul Ignatius knew in his youth was Leon Sermelian. And our next presentation is by Mr. Ludwig Manoukian, who will present a one-man adaptation of Leon Sermelian's exceptional 1945 memoir, I Ask You, Ladies and Gentlemen. It's out of print, but you can find it around, and if you haven't read it, it's an extraordinary book, and Sermelian was an exceptional writer. It's especially suited to our weekend's theme because Sermelian was one of the most gifted Armenian-American writers of his time, and a fascinating character in his own right. Mr. Manoukian has appeared in countless television shows, films, and plays, and he most recently starred opposite Denzel Washington in the legal drama Roman J. Israel, Esquire. His television credits include recurring roles on The Shield and Bosch, and starring roles on Criminal Minds, Grey's Anatomy, and Dexter. He is also a founding member of the Big Bad Armo Show, an Armenian sketch comedy group. So please welcome Mr. Ludwig Manukyan.
Armenian. One bright autumn morning, when I was just 8 years old, my uncle Harutu had come back from Paris. He had a small, pointed brown beard, like a French artist's. He made altogether an extraordinary impression on me. He had a mysterious bundle of manuscripts, which I regarded with awe. It was the year 1911. The pomegranates were bursting with crimson joy in the gardens of Trabzon. It seemed that Uncle Harutu was very tired and needed rest. They took him upstairs and put him to bed in a sunny room. He never came out of his bed. He just lay there like Jesus. Sometimes I caught him writing in his bed. I was half consciously aware of the fact that Uncle Harutu was a poet. But in a few months, he was reduced to skin and bones. God did not call back the angel of death. Uncle Harutu was the first person I had seen die. I asked my brother Onik, 2.5 years older than me, many questions about death. What? Do you mean to say that father and mother will die too? That you and I also will die? Yes, Savin. Father and mother, you and I, all of us. Everybody will die someday. Well, but I'll never die. Oh, you'll just close your eyes and die like the rest of us. Well, then I won't close my eyes. I'll never close them. I'll always keep them open. I'll never close them. Never, no matter what happens. Tell me, how can I die if I never close my eyes? I believed I had discovered the secret to immortality. I want to be again sovereign. The child I was in Trabzon, in the white red-roofed city on the Black Sea that exists no more, but nevertheless will live forever. But I ask you, what can you do when the kids you grew up with are gone, lost? I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, how can a guy forget his children? At school, our instructor of Turkish Mr. Ohanian was a very distinguished-looking man with glasses and graying temples. Our Turkish lesson that day was about the frog that talked too much. The frog said to the heron, "Heron, please take me up with you into the sky. I am tired of living in this slimy water." The heron replied, "Very well, friend frog. Hang on with your mouth to this stick in my beak. But be careful not to open your mouth or say anything. Always keep your mouth shut." The frog promised. So they went up together into the sky. And the frog was happy. But soon he forgot his promise. And as he opened his mouth to speak, he fell on the ground and was killed. Mr. Ohanian took off his glasses and wiped them with a silk handkerchief, put them back on his face, and said in his most exquisite Turkish, "We shall next have an exercise in orthography." Suddenly, a terrific explosion shook the window panes. Mr. Ohanian went to the window to see what it was. It appears a munitions dump in the harbor has blown up. Another explosion, more violent. The Russian warships are bombarding the city. To the church! Everyone to the church! And to the church we ran joyously. We imagined that the Russians were coming to save us from the Turkish yoke. Oh, we were in heaven, listening to the thunder of the Russian guns. Presently, a mob of hysterical women were at the gate. Our maiden aunt, Aunt Afi, had come to take my brother Onik and me home. On our way, German army trucks loaded with Turkish soldiers roared down the main street. It was a terrifying and glorious experience. The next day, both Turks and Armenians fled to villages. We moved to Zethnos, where my grandmother had an estate with 2 houses. It was a cold, rainy day in February. When we reached the village, we saw that both of grandmother's homes had been requisitioned by a prominent Turkish official, Ramzi Sami Bey. His wife was expected to arrive shortly. Her name was Selma Hanus. She apologized in her exquisite Turkish about the inconvenience that she had caused us. Because of my husband's official position, we have to live close enough to the city and out of reach of the Russian guns. Perhaps you could rent to us your larger house. She expressed the wish, patted me on my head that Onik and I, my brother, would play with her 2 sons, Shukri Bey and Mahmud Bey. Both boys were fair, good-looking, in European clothes. We had never played with Turkish children before. We shook hands and talked like friends. We had no idea Turks could be so nice. We boys played from morning to night. Onik! Sabin! Shukri and Mahmoud called. Sabah Hanuz Hayir Olsun! May your morning be felicitous! Sabah Hanuz Hayir Olsun! We replied. Come on, let's play Tip-Cat! After playing Tip-Cat, watched the Turkish recruits drilling on the front lawn. Phone rang. Shukri and Mahmoud went to answer it. They said that they had just spoke to the sons of the Governor General, who was coming to visit. Their fathers were close personal friends. The guests arrived in the afternoon on horseback. 3 boys had mean faces. The youngest one was the meanest. We played knuckle bones and marbles. He went into a rage when he lost. I was willing to let him win, since his father was Governor General, and our lives were in his hands. But I lost my patience. Yebor dog! You can't talk to me like that. You don't have very many more days to live anyhow. We will cut your throats. We will massacre all of you. We will not leave a single Armenian alive. I looked at Shukri and Mahmoud, hoping they would say it wasn't true and would apologize. was true. Don't say a word, Onik cautioned me. Let's go home. We were doomed to die, to be butchered, all of us. And all this time, our neighbors had smiled at us. I remember a Turkish lesson about the heron and the frog. Keep your mouth shut. Next day, a proclamation was posted in the streets of our city from the Turkish government. Our Armenian fellow countrymen, having allied themselves with the Russian government, the enemies of the state and religion, and being in revolt against the Turkish government, are to be deported to special districts in the interior and shall have to remain there for the duration of the war. We hereby order every Armenian in the province of Trebizond to be ready to leave in 1 week. Armenians from this day on are forbidden to sell anything and are allowed to take with them only what they can carry. No carriages can be supplied. If an Armenian opposes this decision of the Turkish government by armed resistance or otherwise, or tries to hide himself, he will be taken, dead or alive. All those who hide an Armenian or give him food or shelter or aid of any kind will be punished by hanging, whether they be Muslims or Christians. It was decided that one of us boys, my brother Onik or I, should be taken to the Greek monastery. Send Onik! I don't want to go! Onik was disguised as a Greek peasant boy and went to the monastery. He would carry on our family name if we all died. There's a gap in my memory here. I cannot recall how I was separated from my father. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and Mother and I rode in a carriage. Where are we going, Mother? To the American mission. Why? The Americans will protect you, dear. Dr. Crawford has received permission to keep boys of your age in his school. Touched her silk handkerchief, gave me a agreeable sensation. We rode up to the mission compound. I'll be back in a minute, Mother said to the driver as we got on. At the mission gate, she bent down and kissed me on my forehead. Her lips were trembling. She tried to say something, but checked herself. Bent down and kissed me again. Go in, darling, and play with the boys. I was at a loss for words. But before I could say anything, she rushed off back to the carriage. The driver cracked his whip, and the carriage rode off. I wanted to cry, Mother! Marie! But I said nothing. I could see that she raised a handkerchief to her eyes and her shoulders shook. I was never to see her again. Walking through the gate, the mission compound was crowded with boys who had been brought and left there by their mothers, trusting them to the protection of the American flag, which flew on a long pole. In a few seconds, I underwent one of those profound inner changes which close one chapter of your life and open another. I realized that my happy childhood had ended. A few days later, a gendarme drove us out of the orphanage. Where are you taking us? Surgun! Deportation? We marched, and marched, and marched, away, further and further away from my home. We arrived in Javizlik, where us boys were separated from the women and girls. We We boys were going to be distributed among the Turks in the district. I had to do something to save myself. I was determined to live. Using my wits, I found a very successful Turkish merchant to adopt me. His name was Osman Aga. He wore a tribal costume and owned a grain store. He named me Jamal. I could not bring myself to call him father. I wanted to like him. He was saving my life, but I could not. I hated him. That week, a mullah came to visit me. News traveled fast of my adoption. The mullah said that they would have to circumcise me. No, it won't hurt much. I decided I would rather die than be circumcised. And if I had to die, I wanted to die after seeing the sea once more. I'll go to Trabzon. I'll hide out in vacant Armenian houses. Sure, Russia was going to come and save us sooner or later. Where the hell was I going? Oh, the whole villages, the whole country was a vast death trap for the Armenians. I scurried away, walking very fast but not running. When I reached the open road, there were no lights, no sounds. And then I reached it. The sea. The sea. I walked to our house. I imagined that I was walking home from school, walking down the main street. I prayed to God, please help me find my mother there at home. I assured myself that everything would be as usual. I turned to left on our side street, and it was overgrown with weeds. Windows and doors were shut. Apparently, I was the first one there. I walked to the gate of our house. It was empty. My heart was beating fast before I entered. Finally, I walked in. It was bare. Bare like the walls of a mausoleum. The living room door, the kitchen door, the drawing room door, all of which opened on this spacious hallway had a vacant, fixed, bony stare. I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, what can you do when the ones you loved are dead and their bones lie unburied? I was 11 years old. There was no home for me in Trabzon anymore. I went from orphanage to orphanage, eventually ending up in Constantinople, where I found my brother once again. With some 20 other boys, we attended the Armenian Central School. We took care not to mention our murdered parents when we talked. And every time I remembered my mother. Where are we going, Mother? To the American mission. Why? Americans will protect you. Dreaming of going to America, I made my plans accordingly, which I kept to myself. Not even my brother knew where I was going. But how to go to America? I had no money. It was 1922. I was 17 years old. One day a man came to the orphanage smoking a cigar. The Armenian Women's Club of Baghdad has raised a fund for the education of 2 talented boys in the 5 arts. I wondered what I should do to attract some attention to myself. In my despair, I decided to pass myself off as a poet. Poets were respected. But for the immediate, I wanted to get the favor of the Armenian Agronomic Society, which from time to time sent deserving poor students to America to study agriculture. That's it! An agricultural poem! Oh, the Armenian Agronomic Society noticed my poem and others I wrote in succession glorifying nature and village life. I applied for a scholarship. I got one! Giving me money, free tuition to the agricultural college of a rectangular state called Kansas. which I had never heard of before. The society also helped me get an affidavit and other necessary papers, and the American consul promised me a visa. The great day of my departure came. I wore a new suit, the cheapest one I could find in the Grand Bazaar, Istanbul. The ship that I sailed on was owned by a Greek company, but it flew the American flag. Alone on the deck, I felt like I was off on the supreme adventure of my life. My heart is a hard red shield, I said. My heart is a star upon my breast, and my breast is the world. I am sailing to America, to the great future, on the raft of my thought. The lighthouse, burning heart of the world, my guide through the starry night. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manoukian. Our final performance tonight is by the talented pianist, composer, author, lecturer, and teacher, Dr. Vache Mankarian, which focuses on the art songs of the great Armenian-American composer, Alan Hovhannes. Mankarian has performed in major cities on 4 continents and has frequently appeared as a soloist with orchestras, including his acclaimed performance with the Armenian Philharmonic Orchestra in Yerevan. He holds a Doctor of Musical Arts degree from USC's Thornton School of Music and is a lecturer of music theory and composition at USC and on the faculty at the Pasadena Conservatory of Music,
where he teaches piano, chamber music, composition, and music history. So we will welcome, in due course, Dr. Vache Mankarian and his fellow musicians who will entertain us. Please welcome them.
Good evening. I don't remember the last time I had to perform this late in the evening, so I'll try to keep it short. So as I've mentioned before, I'm always grateful when Maggie invites me to present Armenian music at these conferences. I've said this, I'd hate to repeat myself, be a broken record. Her conferences are the only ones that include Armenian music in the program, so I appreciate that. Maggie asked me to present music by an American-Armenian composer, and I said, who better than Alan Hovhannes to represent this repertoire. Of course, I'd heard of Alan Hovhannes, I think most of us have, but I really didn't know his music too well. You know, I don't say this, you know, I'm not proud to say this, but it was a great opportunity for me to research in his music. I came to find out that Alan Hovhannes, who was born in 1911 in Massachusetts to an Armenian father, his father, in fact, very interesting that I found, his father was Harutyun Hovhannes Chakmakjian, who was born in Adana. He came to the United States, was educated at Harvard, and he became a professor of chemistry at Tufts University. And in fact, the other interesting aspect about him, he He succeeded Siamanto as the editor of Hayrenik, and he himself was succeeded by Vratsian. Very, interesting father Alan Hovhannes had. His mother was American-Scottish descent, and apparently she did not really want him to learn Armenian. But after she passed away, Hovhannes, was active in the community. He became the church organist, and he got to know Armenian music, especially church music, the liturgy. And that influenced him tremendously. And he's probably, again, I generalize, I should do much more research, and I will do more research on his music. He's one of the few Armenian composers, contemporary composers, who has really focused on the Armenian liturgy, and his music reflects that. He went to New England Conservatory, he studied music. He was composing from the age of 9 continuously, and throughout his lifetime, he passed away in 2000. For almost 89 years, he continuously composed. I met him years ago when he was visiting Los Angeles, and he was being honored at that time. And he was sitting on stage, he had a pencil and paper, he was just continuously writing. He would just write and write and write. He composed over 600 pieces throughout his lifetime. It's a huge number of works. Almost 70 symphonies. That's a huge number, again, for a 20th century composer to have written 70 symphonies. And it's probably his most successful genre, the symphonic genre, and a lot of orchestras perform. He had difficulty in the beginning to become recognized, and the Ajemian sisters in New York, sort of came to his rescue, because he was not initially welcomed in the American circles. In fact, several well-known composers at that time, mocked his music as being ghetto music, but eventually other American composers and especially conductors took notice of his music. His music started being performed by symphonies all over the world. And in fact, later on, the very prestigious publishing house, Peters Editions, started publishing his music. That itself tells a lot about how respected he became during his lifetime. He was a great patriot. He really appreciated, loved, respected his culture, his Armenian culture. He researched in every aspect of it, and his music reflects that. He has many, many works with Armenian titles. In fact, he says he went through his Armenian period, in the 1940s. After that, he started traveling all over the world. And not only did he travel, he went to the Far East, from Korea to Japan to India. And he studied the music of those cultures as well. Not only did he study them, he studied how to play their folk musical instruments. And he became very proficient at those instruments as well. So he was a prolific, hardworking composer. And it's only fair that such greats like Alan Hovhannes, who is, consider him, like Saroyan and Gorky and Mamoulian are great representatives of our culture of the early 20th century or the 20th century. In this case, his music should be heard much more. I initially, when Maggie asked me to present some songs, I tried to purchase the scores. They're not easily found at this point, but there are some editions. In fact, the only copy that I could find to buy was this particular one, and it's the 4 songs, the Armenian songs. He doesn't have too many Armenian songs, but this is one of them. So it's interesting that it's still available for purchase. So I had to go to USC's library to get some of the scores. And as I was carrying the scores to check out, another professor came up and he said, Alan Hovhannes, his music should be played more. And so that was nice to hear that from a USC professor. So as I mentioned, he was continuously composing, and he was very busy. He was married 6 times in his life. And so he didn't give up. And in fact, the 3 of his 6 wives, they were artists themselves, and they really helped him with his career. He spent the last couple of decades of his life in Seattle, and the Seattle Symphony was one of his main champions of his music, and they've recorded a lot of his symphonies. CDs are available, and so you should definitely get the symphonic works. So this evening we have a very short program, 3 pieces, 3 songs, and we decided to do 3 Armenian songs. He has a lot of English songs, songs in English, all sorts of topics you can think of. He's done songs on them, and with different poets. He was a huge fan of also Persian culture, and so he has a lot of songs by Persian poets as well. The 3 songs today, at this point I would like to introduce our soloist this evening. Garine caught the flu and she could not join us this evening. So I'm very grateful that one of my colleagues, in fact, she and I, we went to USC together. We graduated together from USC, maybe a couple of years apart, many, many years ago. I won't say how many. But interestingly, we had never had the chance to collaborate together. So this is our first performance together. And I'm very grateful that Marine accepted last minute to prepare this program so that we can present it this evening. I'd like to introduce her. The Los Angeles Times called Marine Terkazarian the nightingale who sang on Los Feliz, known for her colorful, crystal clear voice and dramatic and expressive stage presence. Soprano Marine Terkazarian has been performing around the world as a singer and a pianist since she was a child. She made her debut with the Armenian Philharmonic at the age of 5 and is the winner of the Los Angeles International List Competition. We are co-winners of that competition, you know. So a devoted teacher and a highly sought-after adjudicator, Ms. Terkazarian is the chair of the Vocal Arts Department at the Pasadena Conservatory of Music. We are colleagues at the conservatory, and is an adjunct professor of music at Glendale Community College. I'd like to invite Marina on stage. So, I don't know who has it worse, singers or pianists. You know, pianists are the only musicians who don't carry their instruments with them. You know, so we are at the mercy of whatever's on the stage. And, you know, they train us to move around the piano also on stage in case you have to. So it's part of our education. But with, you know, singers, they have their instrument, but a little cold, you know, makes the you know, world's difference. The first song we're going to sing, very interesting. This is incredible. It's called Gurge Dikran, and it's in the Van dialect. Alan Hovannes decided to take a folk song from Van and to arrange it for piano and voice. Marina and I had to decipher the dialect because there were a lot of words in it that we had no idea what they were. And her mom came to the rescue and she told us a lot of these words. So here's a song called Urge Dikran or Gurge Dikran in the Van dialect, arranged for piano and voice by Alan Hovannes. Just a little background. It's a humorous song. It's a business deal between 2 guys, Dikran and what's the other guy's name? Kevor. Kevor and Dikran are doing a business deal. One wants to borrow the other's cart to deliver some things, And then he says, well, it's usually 40, dollars or whatever it is, but I'll give it to you for 20, but be careful not to break it. But sure enough, at the end, the cart breaks. So that's the story. So as I mentioned, Hovannes wrote these songs during his Armenian period, as he called them. And this was in the 1940s. And the next set of songs that he wrote, he used both Hovannes Tumanyan's and Avedik Isagyan's poetry. This particular one is Avedik Isagyan's famous poem, very short poem, 6 lines altogether, Ararat. I think most of us know this one, Ararat Izek Petit Stari Get Baryan and so he has this setting, and like I mentioned earlier, this particular song, we hear the influence of the Armenian church liturgy. It's a beautifully composed piece based on Isahakyan's famous poem. Hala Hovannes chooses sacred music to depict our sacred mountain. And so we will end today's short program with probably what is his most famous song, Yar Nazani. And this is very interesting for me because Hovannes chooses the words of the famous author Hamasdev. And it's in Western Armenian. One of the consequences, of course, of the genocide is that Western Armenian is not an official language anymore. And less people are writing, reading, and speaking the language. And I personally don't know too many songs that have been written in Western Armenian, certainly in the last half part of the century. I'm sure there are, but not very many. So this is, for me, it's a very touching song, and it's a very funny song. The words are very funny. It's about a musician who takes the family goat to market, sells it, and buys a saz. And the next day the father goes into the barn, doesn't see the goat, sees a saz hanging from the wall. Of his anger, takes the saz and breaks it on the floor. The fate of musicians, you know.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of the evening. And once again, I want to thank all the performers, speakers, and presenters, and organizers of tonight's program, and to invite you all, yes, please. And to invite you back here tomorrow for the conference. If you can't come all day, come for part of the day. But please do come and hear some of the excellent scholars who will be speaking tomorrow. Thank you all, and good night.